Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Fun topic for you today. Let's go. What's the most pant-shitting paranormal experience you've ever had? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. An old cartoon used to say, "Strange things happen in the middle of nowhere." A guy that used to be my neighbor was a coyote in Mexico. One time, he and his partner were escorting a group of 7 people, consisting of 3 women and 4 men across the border from Mexico to the United States in the late 90s. They were all instructed to wear khaki or brown clothing. Once they were all dressed, they went on their trip. It was getting dark, and they had reached a makeshift checkpoint rest stop to get some sleep and continue in the very early morning. It was hidden under a large mountain underneath some bushes and trees. As they were all resting, the coyote noticed one of the women stand up and go into the bushes. He figured she had to use the restroom or something. The other coyote noticed her and said, "Who was that?" Then it hit him. That woman wasn't wearing khaki colors. She was wearing a pink top with blue jeans and white shoes and pink diagonal stripes and a blue backpack. They both get up and began following her because they think this woman had stolen from the group. As they follow her, my ex-neighbor carries a cane that he brushes against the ground to mark as a trail back. As they follow her, they spot the woman through some desert foliage. They reach to where they last saw her and arrive to a hill that went down with some large rocks. In between some of the rocks, they found a pile of bones face down, wearing that woman's clothing, with the backpack in her hand. Then they heard "No me toques" in a woman's voice with a somber tone, which translates to "Don't touch me." Both of them followed the trail they left behind to the group and instructed them all that they had to leave. Something that happens a lot out there is people will get injuries, and if they can't carry themselves, they're just left out there to die, with the hopes that border police will find them. There's a lot of weird paranormal stories that come from people who cross the border from Mexico to the United States. My grandfather told me this story about how one time he was sitting in a chair in front of the house when he heard his wife repeatedly calling him from inside the house. The thing is, my grandmother passed away a few years before that, but he told me that the voice was so pressing that he actually got up to look inside the house, and as soon as he got inside, he heard a loud crash behind him and turned around to see that the chair he had been sitting in moments ago had been crushed by the cast iron gutter that fell on it. If he didn't come inside the house, he would have probably been seriously injured. I don't know if it's paranormal or not, but every time I think about it, it sends chills down my spine. Happened when I was about 13. Came home at night and noticed that my dad forgot to lock the back door and all the windows on the first floor. Just my mom and I are in the house. Dad was out of town. Since I was technically the man of the house, I decided to do a complete check of the 3,500 square foot house by myself. Swept through the first and second levels, checking under the bed and all closets. When it came time to check the unfinished basement, I grabbed a knife and had my mom follow behind me. I was 13, give me a break. Now when I took a few steps into the basement, before I could turn on the lights, a few boxes that were placed on the concrete floor fell over, almost like someone was hiding behind them for cover. Gathered as much guts as I had at 13 and decided to proceed further with the check. My mom, who was 43 or 44 at the time, stopped dead in her tracks and didn't want to come down any further. At this point, I was 100% sure there was someone in the house. I was just happy I had the knife. Swept through the entire basement and no one was there. The boxes that fell over were heavy and couldn't have fallen without some intervention. Didn't sleep that entire night, just kept guard. Still haven't figured out how it happened. No scientific explanation, no pressure points on the floor, nothing. Well, you took the role of the man of the house seriously. Brave kid. I don't know too many that would have probably done that after hearing all that noise. Worked in a restaurant in high school. It was an old place, hundreds of years old, and doubled as a hotel. It had seen a lot, and multiple people had died there in their 20s, apparently something to do with the mafia. Then, there was a rumor someone had committed suicide years before. After all the guests left, We'd go around the main dining room and do some last-minute tidying up once everything was bussed and cleared. This includes blowing out the candles at each table. The main dining room was linked to the lobby by a pair of double doors. I always locked them after we were done. There was only one set of staff keys. After locking the doors, I walked over to the bar room to divvy up tips with the rest of the staff. I was over there for a few minutes when I heard a huge crash and a laugh from the dining room area. Figuring someone had just dropped a tray, a few of us went back to check. The doors were still locked. There was no spill or broken dishes anywhere, and all the candles on the tables were relit. Worked overnight at various places for my organization. One place was an old mansion, then a residential program for teen moms. If you stood at the bottom of the servants' stairs in the back of the house, you would hear the noise of a party, people talking, laughing, faint music, etc. Another site was torn down, but before we were even there, it was an old convent site. Several people reported seeing nuns standing in the rubble of the buildings. The nuns were described as wearing old-fashioned habits, the full-length type from head to toe. And for my final story, at my main building, we had a new maintenance man start. He was checking out the place by himself and then checked in with the assistant director. She asked him how it was going, any questions. He said no. He had a nice conversation with Mary down in the big laundry room, and she talked about how she used to do all the kids' laundry and repair the clothes, but now she just helps in the kitchen for breakfast and lunch. Our assistant director looks at him and says, "Mary died 2 years ago, but yes, that is what she did." So, yep, he had a full-on conversation with the ghost. I put her name in quotes because I can't remember it off the top of my head. Me and 3 friends were staying at a friend's grandparents' house in Nottingham, England. It was an old house, as many are in England. The stairs were steep with narrow steps, almost like they had been built long before any regulations had been put in place for that kind of thing. This made them hard to run up or down because there were extra steps that were narrower than usual, and we all agreed that the stairs were different here. 4 of us, all 14 years old, were set up to sleep in the living room. His nan and granddad were upstairs in bed. They were old and in bad health. His granddad had only half of one lung from smoking, and his nan had always been quite overweight. We were lay on the sofa tops and tail when we heard someone run down the stairs, switch the light, switch at the bottom of the stairs off, and sprint back up, hitting every single step, something I had failed to achieve myself. We all jumped into the center of the room and huddled together until the morning. None of us can explain it, and we still talk about it to this day. I don't believe in ghosts, and there's obviously an explanation somewhere. Perhaps his grandparents tried to spook us. I mean, who knows? Maybe Grandma and Grandpa are a little more dexterous than you thought. Or maybe it was someone or something else. I met my current partner in October-November 21, and she had been into paranormal investigations for quite some time. I go along as well, kind of as the straight man of the group. I'm a skeptic, but willing to recognize when genuinely weird stuff happens. So I act as a kind of sounding board for anything the others pick up on. If I hear or see something as well, and can't come up with a reason or cause, then it adds to the credibility or feasibility or something genuinely paranormal. Anyway, the first investigation I went along on was to Kelvedon Hatch, a former nuclear bunker in the UK. Really interesting venue. We were there after hours until the early morning. On the plant level, 4 floors below the ground, with all the generators and machinery, something happened. We were talking, sharing opinions of some of the things we had noticed, when there was an almighty roaring or whooshing sound, which had the group stampeding toward the stairs. It was everyone for themselves. I stood there pointing at the hatch and sign I'd noticed, explaining how the drainage system periodically flushes. Best, most genuinely paranormal, unexplained event I witnessed that night was on the strategy planning room floor. We were in a side room doing a spirit box session and getting lots of good responses. Still 3 floors down, I think, so no radio sources really. We were getting names, one-word answers to questions, etc. The main room next door had wooden floors. Very suddenly, there was the sound of heavy, rapid running on the wooden floor. I had a clear view through the door of the side room we were in, looking across the width of the main room, and as the running footsteps traversed the entire length of the room, I did not see a single person moving along the path. It was a little unnerving. My nephew lives with me in an old farmhouse built in the 1840s. When he was about 4, maybe 5, he told me that there was a little boy named Charlie who lived in our house. He said Charlie had never heard of video games, and that Charlie's dad left him home all by himself. This was around the same time that he had an imaginary friend named Mr. Cat, who was an anthropomorphic cat, so I wrote it off. A couple weeks later, I was shaving with the bathroom door open and thought I could see my nephew kind of looking in at me out of the corner of my eye. I stuck my head around and could see him from behind messing with an old china cabinet we keep important stuff in, and just as I walked into the room, I could see my nephew sitting in the living room watching TV. He couldn't have crossed that much distance that fast or silently. I asked him about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, that was Charlie." He says there's a really super book in there from when you were a little boy. And at the bottom of a stack of old documents and stuff in the china cabinet is a book I got as a gift when I was a kid. I didn't even know it was there. It was under 2 boxes of documents and couldn't be seen until the boxes were lifted out. The little boy didn't look like you think of ghosts. He wasn't transparent, he didn't float, he didn't look spooky. He just looked like a kid. Now I'm convinced that people see ghosts, or whatever they are, every day, and don't realize it because they look just as real as we do. Edit. I haven't been able to find any information on people who lived here in the past. My grandparents bought the home in 1967. I asked my grandmother about it, and she said she wasn't surprised I saw Charlie in the bathroom at all because I was little. I played with a little boy I said was named Homer, and Homer would unroll all the toilet paper when nobody was home. I've never seen her, but there's also a woman ghost who appears to be in her mid-20s with long brown hair. I have no idea why I've never seen her, but a couple other family members have. Some friends of the family and several members from the work crew that remodeled our home saw her a couple of years ago. The first full day in the new house, we stayed over the night before. It was me and my dog who were following me everywhere. The laundry was in the basement at that time. The stairs at the second level were on top of the stairs from the basement to the main level. The place had a really strange feel about it. My dog and I were walking to the basement stairs when I heard very heavy steps running down the stairs above me. The steps were so heavy that the stairs I were on were shaking. I paused in terror, then ran out of the house with my pup. After that, it was voices, things moving and falling cabinets opening, heavy scents, etc. This went on for months, and we just had a baby. We were considering selling the house or getting someone in for a session. The night before we made a decision, I prayed to my grandma for help. She had passed, but was always a fierce defender for me, as this house was no place to raise a baby. The next day, everything was gone, and the house had a sense and feel of calm. So I think that if you believe in the paranormal or spirits or ghosts, that they don't have to necessarily be malevolent. They could be good, and this could be an example of that. About 30 years ago now, a friend and I took some acid and watched Poltergeist Part 2, and then decided to go walking around in the middle of the night. Smart. We sat in a green area on a bench, staring down a small hill we called the Dip. We both saw the preacher man from the film standing at the bottom. God knows what it actually was, probably a black bag in a tree or something, and freaked ourselves out so much that we stood up shouting and legged it across the green area. To add to the trauma, as we ran across the field, we both stopped and pointed at a man who we could see silhouetted, still talking loudly. We exclaimed at him, carrying what looked like a long sword or machete, then he was holding out in front of him. We made some more loud noises and ran again, both looking back and realizing it wasn't a sword or machete, but a dog lead. He was just walking his dog, and witnessed 2 spotty teenagers shouting hysterically about a man with a sword. The night continued for a few hours on the same theme, with a demon dog at one point and a general sense of being out of our depth. Good times. I went to take some nighttime photos of a local historic building, which was condemned but had been used to house scientists in the 1940s. I went there with 3 of my friends around midnight. It was a rundown two-story U-shaped building with third floor that only covered small parts of the building. It also had a rundown pool that had a busted-up fence still around it. Two of my friends go around to the right side of the building, and I went around to the left with my other friend. As we came around the very back side of the building, we noticed there was a window that did not have its curtain closed. We looked in, and on the left side of the room is a desk covered in massive amounts of dust, with the exception of a singular handprint on the desk. The jar to the desk was half cocked to the side, as though somebody had recently been sitting there. On the right side of the room was a bed that was made with an ugly color green comforter neatly tucked down with two white pillows. The best was completely tucked in and neat, as though it was a fake bed or motel in a Barbie house. The back and to the left was the door, which was boarded up from the outside, rather extensively, it looked like. We thought it was weird, but figured that maybe somebody had snuck inside. We tried to take pictures, but both our cameras were dead. We start heading back around to the front of the building, expecting to get our phones out of the car. We get back around to the front side of the building and meet my other two friends there. Wondering why they were there, we explained what happened and that our cameras were dead. As we're explaining it, through the glass we hear glass shatter toward the side of the building where the room was. We look up and there's a broken window up on the third floor attic room. Thinking there might be homeless people in there, we make our way back to the front of the building, and as we come around the corner, there's a police officer waiting there. Apparently, there's an agreement with the people who live up the hill from the building that they would watch over the building and call the police if they saw anything suspicious. Explaining that I was just there to take photos, the officer seemed irritated to have responded to the call. He didn't seem comfortable being there, as though he had already had some run-ins with the place. I apologized to the officer because I didn't know that I wasn't allowed to take pictures of this local landmark, and then I explained that he might want to do a check for homeless people or drug users inside, and when he asks why, I explained the glass breaking. He asks us to show him where it was, so we took him over to that side of the building. When we walked, not only was the glass no longer broken, the curtain was now closed, and it smelled like rotten eggs really bad. To this day, I don't know what the F that was. I never believed in ghosts before. I'm not really a spiritual person or anything of the sort, but I can't explain that.